I'm extremely happy to be able to welcome you again to another of our Tahrir Dialogue events, which have reached now 94. I'm trying to catch up with Muhammad Salah and his goal record, but we'll see if we can do that by the end of the semester or not. These events are always special events. We hold them on issues that are very topical to the public and to academia, and we hold them only when we have very distinguished speakers and participants to engage. For the last year and a half, we've been holding the events by Zoom, electronically. Therefore, we have not been able to use this very elegant hall. Even now, coming back to campus, we were restricted by health requirements, and therefore are only really using a quarter of the hall in terms of the physical participation, but it's also in a hybrid format, so it's also on Zoom. Participants are either here or following us on Zoom, and we will engage with both of them. The topic today of the event is Turkey's regional policies. Those of you living in Egypt or living in the region know how important the Turkish role has been, whether one agrees or disagrees with it. But it's a very important country, and it's engaged in regional politics. And it's also had a lot of nuances and shifts in its policy over the years. Just very recently, the Egyptians and the Turks have started to engage each other to see if we can start I don't want to say a détente between the two countries, but at least to start a more constructive engagement once again. I think there's progress there, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done, given that less than a year and a half ago, we were really on the verge of getting into a direct clash, especially in the Libyan frontier. Anyway, to address these issues, we have extremely important panelists, and we have a very well-known and learned moderator and discussant. And I'm going to hand it over very quickly to the main participants and join them and maybe engage later in the question and answers. Our panelist from Turkey is Gönül Tol, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. My wife, who is half Turkish, will kill me if I don't, so I just hope this is good. She's the founding director of the Middle East Institute's Turkey program and a senior fellow of the Frontier Europe Initiative. Ibrahim will, in Dr. Tol's case and also in Mrs. Dawi's case, will present the full background of their bios to give you a better picture. Our second speaker will be Hind Ildawi, who's an Egyptian journalist and political analyst. She has spoken and written extensively on these topics, the Levant, and consequently also relations with Turkey. And she has a tendency to speak her mind, so I'm sure she's going to give us a very enlightened and opinionated presentation. Our moderator, my colleague, and the discussant is Dr. Ibrahim Awad. He's a professor of practice of global affairs, as well as the director of the Center of Migration and Refugee Studies at the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Ibrahim, I will just hand over the floor very quickly to you to allow you to introduce the speakers more formally, and then to give each one of them a chance to say a few words before we open it up to the floor. Let me just make one closing point. Again, we are both on Zoom and face-to-face. So Ibrahim will be taking questions from both modalities, and he will manage what happens first and what comes next. And I very much encourage those on Zoom to send their questions in written form on the chat. That way it enables Ibrahim to look at them and put them in the right order and present them in the way that they should be presented. Thank you again for being here. I'm sure this is going to be an interesting engagement, and Ibrahim, you have the floor.
So thank you very much again for the introduction. We have two distinguished speakers this evening. The first speaker will be, you introduced her briefly already, Nabil Gonil Tol, who is the founding director of the Middle East Institute's Turkey program. Middle East Institute, a famous Washington, D.C. institution. And she's also a senior fellow for the Frontier Europe Initiative. She's the author of the upcoming book titled Erdogan's War, A Strongman's Struggle at Home and in Syria. She taught classes at George Washington University's Institute for Middle East Studies and at the College of International Security Affairs at the National Defense University on Islamist movements in Western Europe, Turkey, on world politics, and on the Middle East. She has written extensively on Turkey-US relations, on Turkish domestic politics, on Turkish foreign policy, and the Kurdish question. She is a frequent media commentator. Our second panelist is Ms. Hind Eldawi. Ms. Eldawi is a journalist and political analyst. She holds a bachelor's degree in media from Helwan University. She has research experience on Iran, Turkey, Libya, the Arab-Israeli conflict, Syria, and Iraq. She also specializes in foreign policy investigations. She has covered the most important Arab conferences in the Middle East, including Davis in the Desert and the International Government. You're most welcome to our Tahrir Dialogue 94, the Turkish regional policies. I am supposed to introduce the panel. So I will read to you a few paragraphs that I wrote. This is my perspective on the issue. It is as good as any other perspective. To me, since the advent to power of AKP in 2002, AKP, the Justice and Development Party in Turkey, its regional policies seem to have gone through three stages. The first one was one of zero problems. Professor Ahmed Davutoglu came to AUC in 2010, was it, Nabil? 2010, to talk about this zero problem policy and explain it to the AUC audience. At the time, with Syria, relations were mended to the extent that at the time Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his spouse received President Bashar al-Assad and his spouse for a family weekend. And trade and economic relations were expanding. The second stage came with the consolidation of the AKPs in Turkey. And of AKPs and Prime Minister Erdogan's power in Turkey on the one hand, and with the advent of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, the resistance to its revolutions, and the advantage armed and extremist groups wanted to take advantage from. In this second stage, Turkey actively supported a turn towards political Islam in the region. In Egypt, it strongly supported the Muslim Brotherhood when it reached power, and after the Muslim Brotherhood fell down. It took a hostile attitude towards the authorities that assumed responsibilities in Egypt since 2013 and hosted its vocal Muslim Brother opposition in Istanbul and other cities in Turkey. In Syria, in the second stage, it supported armed Islamist groups and then militarily intervened in the country. One main concern Turkey had was with Kurdish autonomy. And it militarily intervened also in Libya and sent troops there in support of the Islamist parties to the civil conflict in the country. Undergirding the military interventions and hostility in this second stage was an open ideological confrontation in the region that pitted Turkey not only against Egypt, but also against Saudi Arabia and the UAE. When a dispute arose between the three countries and Bahrain on the one hand and Qatar on the other, it actively supported the latter. In the second stage, millions of Syrian refugees arrived in Turkey, bringing out the interconnectedness between countries of the region. Then the third stage came up. All of a sudden, in the 2020s, under the same AKP and President Erdogan, Turkey wanted and want to improve relations with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Silence was imposed on the Egyptian opposition in Turkey, and rounds of negotiations in Cairo and Ankara are held to find solutions to the problems separating the two countries, with even prospects of resumed diplomatic relations. The Turkish foreign minister visited Saudi Arabia, the UAE National Security Advisor visited Turkey, and the Turkish president talked about large Emirati investments in the country. The ideological confrontation seems to have abated, but this does not keep Turkey from selling drones to Ethiopia at a time it is in dispute with Egypt over the construction of the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and its consequences for the Nile waters reaching Egypt. All the while, and during the three stages, trade and other economic relations kept growing. And in the background are the changing relations of Turkey with Russia, the European Union, including especially Greece, with the United States, Iran, and Israel. So the questions that arise are, do the objectives of Turkey's policies in the Middle East change, or are they fixed? Are the objectives unchanged, but alternative policies are formulated and implemented to reach the same objectives? Objectives or policies? Where is the change? And what are the factors, internal and external, internal in Turkey and external to Turkey, that determine the changing Turkish objectives or policies in the region? So my question to you, you can also raise your own questions to yourself. So please, the floor is yours for 15 minutes, and then Ms. Eldawi will intervene for another 15 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Ambassador Fahmy and the AUC for hosting us. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and you have a beautiful campus. So thank you so much, and thanks for the nice introduction, kind introduction. I completely agree with you. Only I would say that we can talk about 4 phases of Erdogan's regional policy, not 3. And a short answer to your question, do Erdogan's goal changes? I think he has one goal, and that's to remain in power. And his domestic strategy changes, and when his domestic strategy to consolidate his rule changes, so does his regional policy. So I would like to begin my remarks with addressing a question that I get very often whenever I talk about Turkey's regional policy, and that is, how much of Erdogan's regional policy is driven by ideology? So I get that question a lot. And my response to that question is, well, which ideology are we talking about? Because the ideology Erdogan pursues also depends on what he wants to do at home to secure his rule. So he has instrumentalized ideology to consolidate power at home. So everything, all he's interested in is to make sure that he stays in power. That's the only goal. And he adopts whatever ideology serves that goal the best. So this is how Erdogan's mind basically works. He sets a goal for himself. He identifies constituencies that can help him reach that goal. And he cultivates alliances with those constituencies, and he embraced the ideology that will keep that alliance together, and he uses foreign policy to keep that alliance together. So that's been the roadmap since day one, since he came to power in 2002. So as he changes allies at home, Turkish regional policy, actually Turkey's foreign policy shifts. So, as you just mentioned, before the uprisings, Turkey's foreign policy, I should say regional policy, several dimensions to it. First, it was very pragmatic. It was based on trade and investment. That was the main leg, the backbone of his regional policy. Enhancing Turkey's soft power was one of the goals of his regional policy before the uprisings. There was no democracy promotion agenda at all. Turkey was a pro-status quo power, not interested in interfering in the regional countries' domestic affairs. It was a very constructive actor in the region, trying to mediate in regional conflicts, trying to be active in regional institutions. So the question is why was that? I mean, why was Turkey pursued the policy that it did before the Arab uprisings? And again, the question, the answer lies in Turkey's domestic affairs. So what was Erdogan's goal when he came to power? His number one goal was to sideline the secularists, particularly the Turkish military. That was his number one goal. But he knew that he couldn't do this by pursuing an aggressive policy or by provoking the military. And he knew that he needed to build an alliance with a wide constituency that would back his plan to curb the military's power. And the road to that, the main tool to achieve that goal was to pursue a pro-European Union agenda. That would get him there, because a more democratic Turkey, a member of the European Union, that would curb military's power, oversized power in politics. So what did he do? He basically declared that the AKP was not an Islamist party anymore, he framed the AKP as a conservative democratic party, and he cultivated an alliance with a wide sectors of the country, including liberals, center-left segments of the country, and the Kurds. And he adopted a very pro-reform agenda at home and a pro-EU agenda on the foreign policy front. And these sectors, these constituencies backed that plan. So basically on the foreign policy front, in an effort not to provoke the military, he pursued a foreign policy and a regional policy that was very much in line with the secularist foreign policy, the traditional foreign policy. So how did this translate into his Turkey's regional policy? It was very cautious, quite pragmatic, and pro-status quo regional policy. So what happened after the uprisings in the region started? Well, Turkey dramatically changed his regional approach. It became a revolutionary power that backed popular uprisings through its support behind the Islamist movements such as Ikhwan, and risked many of the gains that Turkey had secured before the uprisings along the way. So again, the question is why? Because by the time the uprising started, late 2010, early 2011, Erdogan had achieved his goal of sidelining the secularists. He had sidelined the military, he had consolidated power at home, and he had a new goal. And that was switching the country's parliamentary system to a presidential system that would expand his powers and without any checks and balances. So that was his new goal. And his strategy to achieve that goal was to rely on the conservative segments of the country, including the Islamists, as well as the Kurds. So he thought that by relying on these constituencies, he could secure that goal, because liberals or center-left groups would not back his plan to establish a one-man rule. So he wanted to change allies and cultivated an alliance. So to secure these groups, Islamists and conservatives and Kurdish support behind his plan, he did several things. He embarked on an agenda, an Islamization agenda at home. He injected Islam into the country's education system, carried out socially conservative policies, and he launched a Kurdish opening in an effort to grant more rights to the Kurds that would increase his appeal among the Kurds. So that was the goal. So regional policy, in terms of regional policy, that was the domestic scene. Uprisings, in fact, came at the perfect time for Erdogan, because at a time when he was taking steps of Islamization at home, all of a sudden these popular uprisings started toppling down regimes, paving way to groups like Ikhwan. So he could extend his domestic policy, this Islamization agenda, beyond Turkey's borders in the region. So it came at the perfect moment for him. So Turkey started pursuing a very sectarian agenda in the region, again backed the Muslim Brotherhood, and pitched himself as the leader of the Sunni world. But the problem was that his plan failed at home. His alliance with the Kurds and some Islamists basically fell apart. His party lost its majority in the parliament in 2015 elections, mostly thanks to the pro-Kurdish party's capture of a historic 13%. That denied him, his party, the parliamentary majority. So he changed his strategy again. I mean, he couldn't secure the presidency. He couldn't switch to an executive presidential system with that alliance. So in 2015, understanding that the rise of the Kurds, he was hoping that a stronger Kurdish, he was hoping to secure support from the Kurds. When it didn't happen, in fact, the opposite happened, mostly because of Syria. The rise of the Kurds undermined his plans to become the country's first elected president. So he switched plans. Starting from 2015, he cultivated an alliance with the Turkish nationalists. And to be able to keep that alliance together, he pursued a very aggressive anti-Kurdish agenda, both at home and in the region. He basically dumped the Kurdish, the peace process with the Kurds, and he the war with the PKK, which is the Kurdish militant group, resumed after 2015 elections, and his foreign policy became very anti-Western from 2015 onwards, very militaristic, really aggressive. As Mr. Ibrahim just mentioned, he launched several military incursions into Syria, starting from 2016, deployed troops in Libya, pursued a very aggressive policy in Eastern Mediterranean, and ramped up cross-border attacks into northern Iraq. That's where the PKK's headquarters are based. So the interventionist, militaristic, and pro-Ikhwan policy Erdogan pursued starting from after the uprising started, strained Turkey's relations, both with regional countries and also with the West. And another turning point came in 2019. That's a very important year because Turkey held local elections, and Erdogan's party lost almost all major cities in Turkey, and that was a huge blow to Erdogan's rule. And one of the top reasons for his election loss was obviously the country is officially in an economic recession, and that's reason number one. But the second most important reason was the presence of almost 4 million Syrian refugees. So many people, including Erdogan's own supporters, blame Erdogan's Syria policy for that. And so he rode the nationalism tiger for so many years in the hopes that it would only attack the Kurds, but that nationalism's target became the Syrian refugees that started undermining Erdogan's rule. So I think moving forward, the presence of Syrian refugees is going to become a top campaign issue in the next elections, and that's further trouble for him. So his Erdogan at the moment is at his most vulnerable. Economy is not doing well, and I don't think he has a plan in place that can resolve that. His polling numbers are sagging. The combined vote share support for Erdogan's party and its nationalist alliance is well beyond the 50% one that's necessary to win the next presidential elections. So, and again, the nationalist backlash against Syrian refugees is growing. And that makes him really vulnerable. So that's why he recalibrated his policy again, and that's why he is now trying to mend ties with the West. He's trying to mend ties with regional countries like Egypt, Israel, Gulf countries, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. He's been toning down his anti-American rhetoric, trying to build a more positive agenda with the European Union. So I think, again, to wrap up, the key to understanding what Erdogan is doing on the foreign policy front is to look at his domestic strategy. So the next elections are scheduled to take place in 2023. Some think that he might call for early elections, but he's weak, and nationalism is not doing the trick for him anymore. Despite his alliance with the nationalists in 2019 local elections, it wasn't enough for him to win the elections. So that's why he's been trying to reach out to different constituencies. He's recently reached out to the Islamists, and he's taken some steps to secure their partnership. For instance, he withdrew from this convention that protects women against domestic violence to please conservative segments of the country. He's trying to reach out to the Kurds again. He delivered a talk in Diyarbakir, a major Kurdish town in Turkey, in an effort to appeal to the Kurds. But I don't think it's going to work, and I don't think nationalism is going to save him, and that's the reason why he backed down on his aggressive approach in places like Eastern Mediterranean. That's why he's now reaching out to the Egyptians. That's why he wants to mend ties with the Saudis, with the UAE, and that's why he was so desperate to get a photo op with Biden when he was in New York. And he's doing all he can to send the right message to Europeans as well. And I'll stop there. I'm sorry if I exceeded my time.
Not at all. Perfect on time. Thank you very much for these very clearly expressed ideas, and you broke down, in fact, the second stage in two stages, which is very interesting. Thank you very much. So I noticed that it is domestic determinants, internal determinants that move the AKP under Erdogan to change policies and to change directions. And of course, the unnatural alliance with the nationalists did not pay off after all. very interesting. I think we'll come back to that in the second round. But now I already introduced السيدة هند الضاوي، وهي كما ذكرت صحفية ومحللة سياسية. والسيدة هند الضاوي استمعت إلى ما تفضلت به المتحدثة الأولى جونيل تول. فسؤالي أو لدي سؤالان لها. الأول هو عما إذا كان التغير في توجهات السياسة الإقليمية التركية، نفس السؤال الذي وجهته للمتحدثة الأولى، هو تغير في الأهداف أم في السياسات المؤدية إلى الأهداف؟ وسؤالي الثاني هو ما تعليقك على ما قالته المتحدثة الأولى؟
يعني أولاً بشكر حضراتكم على الاستضافة وبشكر الحضور. فكرة أن تركيا لجأت لتغيير سياستها مؤخراً بالنسبة لدول الشرق الأوسط وحتى مع يعني حلفائها الأوروبيين، هذا الأمر يتعلق بأمور كثيرة ومتغيرات إقليمية ودولية طرأت في المرحلة الأخيرة. من أهم هذه التغيرات هو الوضع الاقتصادي الضاغط على الداخل التركي، لأننا نعلم أن تركيا أو حزب العدالة والتنمية تحديداً منذ عام 2001 نجح في حكم تركيا لأنه تبنى سياسات كما تفضلت حضرتك دكتور وذكرت أحمد داوود أغلو، وهي صفر مشاكل، بمعنى أنها أعطت أولوية لمساحة التفاهم السياسي التي انعكست إيجابا على العلاقات الاقتصادية ما بين تركيا وحلفائها في الشرق الأوسط أو أصدقائها في الشرق الأوسط، وأيضا مع الحليف الغربي لها بشقيه الأوروبي والأمريكي. هذا الوضع الاقتصادي ربما ظهر تبعاته في تغير القاعدة الشعبية لحزب العدالة والتنمية، وظهر في الانتخابات البلدية الأخيرة، وحتى أن أكثر من 1,000,000 تركي في عام واحد خرجوا أو يعني تنازلوا عن عضويتهم في حزب العدالة والتنمية، وظهرت أحزاب أخرى بعد خروج شيوخ الحزب وانفصالهم عن الرئيس أردوغان مثل أحمد داوود أغلو وعلي باباجان وغيرها. هذا يتعلق بالسبب الداخلي. أما السبب الخارجي أن المشروع اللي راهنت عليه تركيا من البداية كان له علاقة بالإسلام السياسي، وكانت تركيا في هذا الوقت تلعب على وتر أن هناك علاقة عضوية ما بين حزبها الحاكم وما بين معظم التيارات الإسلامية في منطقة الشرق الأوسط. وهنا دعمت يعني مشروع يطلق عليه البعض الربيع العربي، بينما البعض الآخر يطلق عليه أنه الفوضى العارمة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط، ما دفع أردوغان شخصيا للانقلاب على أهم رفاقه وأصدقائه كما تفضلت وذكرت الرئيس بشار الأسد وأيضا معمر القذافي في مرحلة ما. هذا المشروع فشل بداية من مصر بعد أن تم إسقاط نظام الإخوان، وامتد إلى السودان ومن بعدها إلى تونس وعدة دول، وبالتالي وجد النظام التركي أن استمرار التعويل على مشروع الإسلام السياسي هو مزيد من الفشل، ولا بد أن يحدث ذلك يعني تحول نوعي في السياسة التركية. تزامن ذلك طبعا مع صعود دونالد ترامب لرئاسة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، واتخاذوا سياسات ربما تتعارض مع المصالح التركية، منها على سبيل المثال دعم الأكراد، ما رآه حزب العدالة والتنمية أنه يهدد الأمن القومي التركي. هذه النقطة الأولى. النقطة الثانية أن أمريكا في هذا التوقيت رفضت منح تركيا منظومة صواريخ باتريوت الخاصة بحماية حدودها خاصة الجنوبية. هذا الأمر أيضا أغضب تركيا في ذلك الوقت، بالإضافة أيضا إلى ذهاب تركيا لعقد مقاربات ما بينها وما بين الروسي في سوريا، أدت إلى الإضرار بمصالح الغربية بشقيها الأمريكي والأوروبي كرد فعل على السياسة الأمريكية في عهد دونالد ترامب، وبالتالي عقدت صفقة الS-400 بالإضافة أيضا إلى جولة مباحثات متعددة مع النظام السوري بقيادة بشار الأسد أستانا، أدت لتهدئة الأوضاع وفرض النظام السوري سلطته وسيطرته على معظم المناطق السورية. كل هذه الأمور أدت لإعادة يعني تركيا النظر في سياستها مع أشقائها أو مع حلفائها عفوا الأوروبيين، بالإضافة أيضا إلى أن في وقت يعني حدث خلاف كبير ما بين تركيا من جانب وقبرص واليونان من جانب بسبب غاز الشرق المتوسط وفكرة ترسيم الحدود. انحازت أمريكا بما لا يدع مجالا للشق للجانب اليوناني والأبروسي، ووقتها تحدث وزير الخارجية الأمريكي بومبيو وحذر تركيا بشكل مباشر بأن تحركاتها في المتوسط ربما يؤدي إلى فرض عقوبات عليها. هذا الأمر أيضا جعلها تتقرب أكثر من الروسي. هناك أيضا كثير من المتغيرات، منها على سبيل المثال ما حدث في ليبيا. التحرك التركي نحو ليبيا جاء بدعم مباشر بريطاني، هذا ما قاله مولود تشاوش أوغلو في إحدى لقاءاته الصحفية الداخلية حين سألته إحدى وسائل الإعلام من يدعم التحرك التركي في ليبيا العسكري، قال بريطانيا تقف معنا. ولكن حين تدخل إلى ليبيا كان يريد خلق أوراق جديدة للضغط على النظام الروسي وتحقيق مكاسب أخرى وأيضا على الأوروبيين والأمريكان. النتيجة أنه دخل إلى ليبيا وحاول تكرار السيناريو السوري بعقد مقاربات في ليبيا مع الروسي، وهذا الدور لم يكن قد حدده له البريطاني، ما دفع في الآخر دونالد ترامب لدفع العملية السياسية في ليبيا وتحذير تركيا بقيادة أردوغان بأن التحرك نحو مزيد من الاصطدام في ليبيا ربما يؤدي أيضا لفرض عقوبات. والآن الوضع في ليبيا تقريبا قفز على المصالح التركية اختيار نظام سياسي جديد والمقاربة ما بين الآن بريطانيا وروسيا في مجلس الأمن على خروج القوات التركية في مقابل قوات فاغنر الروسية، ولم يصبح هناك حديث عن دور تركي منتظر في ليبيا. كل هذه التحولات تضاف أيضا إلى المصالحة الرباعية ما بين مصر والسعودية والإمارات والبحرين مع قطر. هذا الأمر أفقد خزينة الدولة التركية الكثير من الدعم القطري، لأننا نعلم أن قطر قدمت أكثر من 20 مليار دولار دعم للبنك المركزي التركي، ولولا هذا الدعم لأعلن البنك المركزي التركي إفلاسه في الداخل وبسبب الأزمات المتتالية. أيضا فكرة أن أمريكا اعتمدت سياسة الاستدارة نحو آسيا وطرق الشرق الأوسط، هذا الأمر سمح بمساحة أكبر من الصراع ما بين الفرنسي والتركي، وأيضا لم يكن من اهتمام الثنائي البريطاني الأمريكي الآن حل الخلاف ما بين فرنسا وما بين تركيا، وبالتالي تبحث تركيا عن إيجاد نقاط تواجد يمكن أن تقارع بها الفرنسي في المرحلة القادمة، لأنها تعلم أن الانسحاب الأمريكي ربما يخلق فراغ كبير. فكرة أن تركيا تعود إلى نظرية صفر مشاكل، أنا لا أعتقد أنها بالمرة هي تصحيح لأخطائها، هي فقط مناورة تشبه مناورة سليم الأول مع الدولة المملوكية في مصر، فقط إعادة ترتيب أوراق من أجل الاستعداد لمرحلة قادمة. هي تريد الحصول على كعكة من الغاز في شرق المتوسط، كانت تعتقد أنها بالتودد نحو مصر دون تقديم أي تنازلات هذا ربما يجعل مصر تتقرب منها وتنقلب على الثنائي القبرصي اليوناني، ولكن مصر تعلم هذا وقرأت التاريخ جيدا خاصة في علاقة مصر مع تركيا، وبالتالي لم تقدم حتى في المباحثات الاستكشافية مع مصر أي تنازلات سوى غلق مجموعة من القنوات الإعلامية لا تسمن ولا تغني من جوع بالمرة، ولا ترتقي حتى لأن تطرح على مائدة التفاوض بين دولتين إقليميتين كمصر وتركيا. وبالتالي هناك كثير من العوامل كما ذكرتها داخلية وخارجية أدت لتحول السياسة التركية. أيضا هناك نقطة هامة أن التحالف أو تحالف أوكوس الجديد ما بين بريطانيا وأمريكا وأستراليا أخرج بشكل معروف الناتو من لعبة التوازنات الدولية. كانت تركيا تعتمد كونها عضو في الناتو ما أعطاها مساحة أكبر على الساحتين الإقليمية والأوروبية، هذا الأمر دفعها للعب الكثير من الأدوار سواء كانت في سوريا أو في العراق حتى أو في ليبيا. هذا الآن كانت تركيا دائما حتى تهدد الأوروبيين بأنها إذا لم يتم الانصياع لسياستها أو تحقيق مصالحها بأنها ستنسحب من حلف الناتو لأنها الأكبر عددا وتعدادا في هذا الحلف. ولكن بعد تحالف أوكوس أعتقد أن الناتو حتى لم يصبح كما كان، وبالتالي تركيا فقدت ورقة من أهم أوراقها على طاولة السياسة السياسية والعسكرية سواء كان في الإقليم الشرق أوسطي أو حتى في الساحة الدولية. كل هذه المتغيرات هي ما دفعت في النهاية إلى تحولات كثيرة في السياسة التركية، بالإضافة إلى خلافات كبيرة داخل الحزب الحاكم كما ذكرت في البداية أدت لخروج شيوخ الحزب، بل بالعكس يعني معاداة أردوغان علنا بسبب مجموعة البجع اللي هي صهر أردوغان وغيره. وبالتالي فكرة هل ستستمر تركيا في محاولة استعادة نظرية صفر مشاكل أم يعني ستعود مرة أخرى، أنا أتوقع أنها لم تحقق الكثير في المرحلة القادمة في العلاقات مع عدد من الدول العربية، حتى لو عادت العلاقات الاقتصادية بينها وبين بعض الدول كالإمارات لمرحلة أكبر مما كانت عليه قبل القطيعة، لكن على المدى البعيد ستتصادم وتتقاطع المصالح ما بين تركيا وما بين عدد من الدول خاصة في الشرق المتوسط.
شكرا جزيلا، شكرا جزيلا أستاذة هند على مداخلتك وعلى توافق بعدة موضوعات. السياسة التركية في ظل أردوغان تجاه سوريا وتجاه ليبيا، والعلاقات مع الولايات المتحدة ومع الاتحاد الأوروبي. وأنت قلت أنك لا تتوقعين أن ترجع تركيا إلى سياسة صفر مشاكل. أنا هذا توقعك. أنا في الواقع في النصف ساعة القادمة التي سنتناقش فيها وسنفتح الباب للنقاش مع الحاضرين ومع الحاضرين عبر زوم، أول أسئلتي لجونيل تول هو do you think that because Hind said that she does not expect Turkey to revert or to succeed in reverting to the zero problems policy. First, is this on the mind of the Turkish political system or on the minds of decision makers in Turkey to revert to the pre-2011 policy? And second, do you think that Erdogan will for sure have time, even if he wanted, to revert to the zero problem policy? Because you have elections in 2023, and he has already lost Ankara, he has lost Istanbul, major cities. So in fact, he's in quite a vulnerable position, and you said so at the beginning, and this is probably one of the reasons, one of the factors that has made him change directions and try to mend fences with countries of the region and even with the European Union. And related to that, Hind talked about Trump. In fact, Trump had good relations with Erdogan. It is Biden. The concern for Erdogan was Biden, right? So what do you think? How will international politics also impact on the regional approaches of Turkey from now on?
Well, I think a return to the pre-uprisings era is not possible, even if Erdogan wanted, because that was a time when Erdogan had a good product to sell to the region. Turkish economy was booming. He was doing okay in terms of carrying out reforms. I should say early in his rule, he did good things in terms of carrying out reforms. And many people talked about Turkey that as a model that could be emulated by others in the region. And that debate at the time made sense. And Erdogan's coming to power, and Islamist-rooted leaders coming to power in a country which had carried out the most radical secularization reforms in the region, changed the perceptions of regional countries vis-à-vis Turkey and opened a new page between Turkey and the region. So I think before the uprisings, both Erdogan's past background and also the fact that he basically said that he's not an Islamist, his party is not an Islamist anymore, that was received well by the regional countries and on the Arab street too, I think. And also you have Turkey is a country, it's a Muslim majority country, and yet it's trying to become an EU member, it's a NATO member. So Erdogan had a story to tell, a success story to tell to the people of the Middle East. And the Arab regimes they welcomed Turkey's newfound activism under Erdogan's rule, because he did not have he didn't intervene in domestic affairs of regional countries. He didn't have, it was purely pragmatic, wanted to boost trade and investment, which worked for the region as well. And that provided an opening. And the region welcomed this new Turkey under Erdogan. Now fast forward to today, that's not there. If you look at public opinion polls conducted before the uprising, if you want to measure Turkey's soft power, remember the times when Turkish soap operas were very popular. It was watched in almost every Arab household. And Erdogan was a very popular leader. Turkey was a popular country. Many people in the Middle East thought that Turkey was playing a constructive role in the region. And that was before the uprising started. And I think Turkey's Syria policy dealt a huge blow to that perception. So if you compare public opinion polls conducted before and after the uprising, particularly after the uprising in Syria, there's a dramatic change in the views of the Arab world vis-à-vis Erdogan and Turkey. So today he does not have a success story to tell. Turkish economy is in trouble. He has just become another dictator in the sense that he controls everything. There is no, the presidential system that he has built, it has no checks and balances. He has built a one-man rule, and it's not original. And his relationship with the Western world, with the EU, with NATO partners, they are strained. So he doesn't, and plus he has a baggage now, because he backed popular uprisings when these regimes, which were considered an existential problem for these regimes. So he might talk about mending ties with the Saudis, for instance, and the Saudis might welcome it, but at the end of the day, for instance, I mean, there's a history. They're never gonna forget Erdogan's stance on the killing of Khashoggi, for instance. And I don't think, yes, he said that he wants to mend ties with Egypt, but there's a history to it. I mean, the stance that Turkey took in 2013, it's going to poison the relationship. That doesn't mean that diplomatic ties will not be normalized. That doesn't mean that obviously they will work, they will cooperate in areas where they can. There's a very pragmatic dimension to the relationship from both countries' point of view. But on the other hand, that history is always going to be there that will erode trust further, and that will make going back to the pre-uprising era, in my mind, impossible. And you talked about, you said that Erdogan had great relations with Trump. That's true, but Trump didn't deliver. That didn't really change much in Turkey-US relationship. Trump went out of his way to help Erdogan, that's true. There was a personal chemistry between them, but thank God there are checks and balances in the US, there are institutions, and he didn't deliver on the most important issues that's now poisoning the ties, such as S-400s. The sanctions are in place, and even under Trump, sanctions were imposed on Erdogan. Several issues still are there. Extradition of Fethullah Gülen. Erdogan blames him for the failed coup, for instance. Despite promises from Trump, nothing moved because it's up to the courts, American courts, and Trump couldn't change things there. So despite the personal chemistry, there are structural problems affecting Turkey-US ties, and they're going to remain there. So with this administration, with the Biden administration, Erdogan is desperate to mend ties. But for several reasons, it's not going to happen. It's not go back to the golden years where this relationship was defined as a strategic partnership. That strategic partnership is dead, and it died in Syria. Because in Syria, the United States has armed a group that is considered an existential threat to Turkey's national security. That's the PKK. And from the US point of view, by the way, Turkey backed a group that the US considers an existential threat. That's ISIS. So that's the US view on things. So that's why I think we live in a world now where, especially with the rise of right-wing populism, the alliances are not as strong. Mostly there are ad hoc arrangements on the foreign policy front. That means that the countries will cooperate in areas where they can, but principles will not bind them together. It's not, like the strategic partnerships are not going to be there forever. So that's why I don't see a return to the pre-uprising era anytime soon.
I think what you say is that history does not go back, never. History always advances. And in fact, I think that Erdogan even missed that you cannot go back to a conservative society after the radical secularization in Turkey. And I think this is something that is lost on many political leaders, that you cannot revert to where you were before. So I agree with you. And I even think that he does not consider returning to zero problems policy. It's not that he cannot, I think that he does not even envisage it. And because, as you said, there is no model that he can project now. So let me ask هند الضاوي، يعني تقول أنه في الواقع لا يمكن العودة إلى سياسة صفر مشاكل. لا يمكن العودة، خاصة وأن قبل 2011 كان هناك نموذج ما يستطيع أن يبثه في المنطقة، وكانت المنطقة في الواقع متلقية لهذا النموذج، ونجح اقتصاديا، وهو حاول أن يعطي صورة عن نفسه أنه ليس من الإسلام السياسي، وهو في النهاية حاول التوفيق بين نظام نيابي من جانب وبين القيم المحافظة من جانب آخر، فهذا لقي قبولا في المنطقة، ولكنه لا يستطيع ذلك الآن. وأنا أظن أنه من مشاكل الرئيس التركي الآن أنه ليس عنده نموذج وليس عنده شيء يطرحه في المنطقة، وهذه نقطة الضعف الأساسية عنده. الاقتصاد في وضع ضعيف جدا، عنده مشاكل داخلية، ونظامه ليس مؤكدا أن يستمر حزبه في الحكم، وليس عنده ما يعطيه للمنطقة. فما رأيك في هذا، وما الذي يمكن أن تكون له من نتائج في المنطقة؟
يعني أنا أتوافق مع حضرتك جدا في فكرة إن هو ما عندوش نموذج يقدمه، بس أنا شايفة إن هو لعب، أو يعني مارس اللعب على أكثر من نموذج. حين تستدعي المرحلة أو المنطقة مشروع الإسلام السياسي، فهو يتصدر من خلال أنه رئيس حزب العدالة والتنمية الإسلامي في المنطقة، ومن حقه حتى قيادة الدول السنية في المنطقة في مواجهة ما يصنفه أو يسوقه كأنه مثلا قيادة شيعية للمنطقة وكثير من هذه المشروعات. حين يتعلق الأمر بالبحر قزوين وغيره من المناطق، هنا يلعب على فكرة القومية التركية الجامعة للأذريين وللإيغور وغيرها من المناطق. حين يتعلق الأمر بالأوروبيين، يستطيع تسويق النموذج العلماني للتقرب أكثر والتودد للأوروبيين وإيجاد مساحة مشتركة يمكن التفاعل من خلالها مع المجتمع الغربي المتفتح طبعا الليبرالي. ولكن في النهاية في استراتيجية حاكمة تم الإعلان عنها بشكل رسمي للنظام التركي، وهي استراتيجية العثمانيين الجدد، ما أثبت أن استغلال تركيا للإسلام السياسي منذ عام 2011 كان مرحلي وليس إيمانا بفكر الإسلام السياسي. تحدثت تركيا بشكل مباشر من خلال وزير الخارجية سليمان سويلو عن أهمية استعادة ما يسمى الميثاق الملي للحدود التركية. الميثاق الملي تم توقيعه أو طرحه بعد الحرب العالمية، ونتج عنه عقد اتفاقية لوزان. بالمناسبة كل التحركات التركية يمكن أن تقرأ أيضا في انتهاء معاهدة لوزان في عام 2023. اتفاقية لوزان هي اللي حددت بقايا الدولة العثمانية والخارطة الجغرافية اللي موجودة حاليا عليها الشكل التركي. كانت تركيا قدمت الميثاق الملي، وهو يضم الشمال السوري بأكمله من أول لواء الموصل حتى والشمال السوري ولواء الإسكندرونة ضمن الحدود الدولة التركية الجديدة. هذا الأمر رفضه البريطانيين، ولكن تركيا تريد الآن وتسوق إعلاميا أنها لن تجدد معاهدة لوزان، وأنها من حقها استعادة أو السيطرة على ما يقع في جغرافية الميثاق الملي وهو الشمال السوري. وهذا يفسر لماذا عمدت تركيا لتغيير ديموغرافية الشمال السوري وتوطين مجموعة من الإيغور والأذريين في هذه المنطقة ويتوافقون أو يندرجون تحت القومية التركية الأكبر. هناك مشروع آخر، ولذلك أنا أتفق مع الدكتور إبراهيم أنه لا يمكن العودة إلى نظرية صفر مشاكل، وهي الوطن الأزرق. وتركيا تتحدث الآن بشكل علني، والرئيس أردوغان خرج في عام 2019 أثناء لقائه مع طلاب في الكلية الحربية التركية وخلفه خارطة تسمى الوطن الأزرق، يتحدث بأن لا يمكن أن تنحبس أو تنحصر تركيا في جغرافيا ظالمة، ويقصد هنا الحدود التركية الحالية. استراتيجية الميثاق الملي واستراتيجية الوطن الأزرق. الوطن الأزرق نعلم أن ضم الناتو لتركيا في مرحلة ما كان بسبب تصنيفها دولة مضايق البسفور والدردنيل، وتأثير ذلك الاستراتيجي على الأمن أو حفظ التوازن الأمني مع روسيا. وبالتالي تركيا تريد استعادة هذه الخريطة بشكل أوسع بضم أجزاء كبيرة من المياه الاقتصادية في بحر المتوسط وفي بحر إيجا وفي البحر الأسود. هذا الجزء الأول من استراتيجية الوطن الأزرق، ومن ثم تطبيق إذا نجحت في هذا الأمر الجزء الثاني يتعلق ببحر الخليج وعمان والبحر الأحمر، وهذا يفسر سعيها الدائم لبناء قواعد عسكرية على البحار كالصومال مثلا وفي قطر، وميناء سواكن اللي وقعت عليه في نظام عهد البشير. وبالتالي لم تتنازل تركيا عن هذه الاستراتيجيات كالميثاق الملي، لم ترغب حتى في التفاوض على الانسحاب من الشمال السوري، لم تتنازل عن استراتيجية الوطن الأزرق بل تعلنها بشكل يومي في المرحلة الحالية. بالمناسبة أول إعلان عن استراتيجية الوطن الأزرق بشكل رسمي في تركيا كان في عام 2016 بعد محاولة الانقلاب مباشرة، وهذه الاستراتيجية ترفضها بشكل علني الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. ولذلك أعتقد أن تركيا ما زال لديها استراتيجيات وخطط وأجندات في منطقة الشرق الأوسط. محاولة تلطيف الأجواء الآن أو العلاقات مع الدول العربية هي مرحلة فقط لالتقاط الأنفاس حتى انتخابات الرئاسية التركية والوصول لحل في معاهدة لوزان، ومن ثم الإعلان عن طريقتها أو سياستها الجديدة. ولا أعتقد أنها ستتوافق في هذه السياسات مع المنطقة العربية.
يعني في تقديرك أنت اتفقتي مع جول في أنه الرئيس التركي يختار، هي قالت أيديولوجية، أي أيديولوجية، هذا أول ما قالته جول، وأنت فعلا تقولين أنه يتغير ويختار التوجه الذي يناسبه في كل لحظة. ثم عدت إلى الوراء وتحدثت عن اتفاقية لوزان، واتفاقية لوزان هي في الواقع يعني هي تعديل لصالح تركيا لاتفاقية سافر التي كانت اتفاقية لم تطبق، وكانت شروطها شروط قاسية للغاية. أنا في الواقع سأسأل جول عن هذا. و you know, you are in agreement in respect of the first point you raised, that ideology, which ideology? So the ideology, President Erdogan chooses the ideological perspective that suits the moment, and that he has different approaches. Approaches depends on. But Hind attributes to Erdogan, to Turkey, grand strategies, and she quotes former foreign minister of Turkey about tourism and about reaching out to the different seas where Turkey had history, and therefore that makes her doubt the intentions of Turkey. Is this a perspective of Turkey, or is it of Erdogan? I think we need always to distinguish between political actors. We are not, it's not a billiard ball. Countries are not billiard balls. So what do you think? Do you think that Erdogan has time even to implement this grand strategy? He is, again, in a vulnerable situation. And what distinguishes him from other approaches to regional policy and to more global orientation? Because if you want to project your power in all these seas, in fact, it's not regional any longer. That's become global. What do you think?
Well, so is it Erdogan, you asked? Well, it is, but it's not just him. As I said, he's not strong enough. He calls the shots, but what he's going to do is largely determined by the alliance that he's in. Right now, the alliance that he has with nationalists has been driving his domestic and foreign policies. But it's not as strong as it used to be. I mean, right after 2015, especially after the failed coup in 2016, that alliance got stronger. Now, I think it's faltering. There are too many problems, domestic challenges that he's facing, and nationalism is not working anymore. So I think that's why he's now in search of a new strategy. But I think he has run out of tricks. He managed to alienate large segments of the country. People who are strong Erdogan supporters, even they are critical of, firstly, the state of economy. And in a sign of his weakness, he had to accept the resignation of his son-in-law. And to me, that's the ultimate sign that he doesn't have many options and that he's really vulnerable. So, yes, Erdogan calls the shots, but his actions are largely driven by his domestic strategy of staying in power and who he's allied with. And you had a question about where he stands now aligns with the regional thinking. I say yes, in the sense that I think now the region is in a post-uprising era, entering a post-uprising era, in the sense that right after the uprisings, the mood in the region was do whatever you can, invest in military capability, and try to fix problems using a security approach focus. So all the countries in the region, including Turkey, pursued very aggressive policies. Obviously, Muslim Brotherhood was a huge threat, so there was that fear. And now, there were doubts that the Americans, the US, would withdraw from the region, so that only strengthened that fear of an existential fear almost, which led to reckless policies in the region by all actors. But now, I think there's a new understanding, and Erdogan has come to the same conclusion. Muslim Brotherhood is not, I mean, political Islam has failed in many places, and that's one of the reasons why Erdogan does not have a good product to sell to the region. So it has failed, which in many ways weakened that paranoia about Muslim Brotherhood that, for instance, the Gulf countries had, and that was one of the main bones of contention between Turkey and these countries. And that kind of paved the way for a rapprochement too. And second, I think all these countries, including Turkey, realized that a heavy hard power approach didn't really work. It hasn't produced the intended results. Turkey has troops everywhere, pursued a very militaristic foreign policy. It hasn't done much except for isolating Turkey further. And I think there is an understanding, I might be wrong, you probably know this better, but I think there's an understanding, for instance, in the Gulf as well, that they have to tone down, they have to focus on diplomacy, they have to be more pragmatic, they have to focus on trade and investment, especially in the post-COVID, those become more pressing concerns. So Ikhwan is not the most pressing problem anymore. So in that region, there's a renewed focus on diplomacy and a step away from that hard power militaristic approach. And there is an understanding, I think that perception is stronger now, that the US is not going to be there. Particularly in the Gulf, I mean, even under Trump, even when Trump was there, after the Iranian rockets fell on Saudi territory, Trump just didn't do much to address Saudi concerns, for instance. So that strengthened the perception that the US is not going to be there. So we have to find regional mechanisms and tools to fix our own problems. We have to rely on each other. So that whole shift in thinking paved the way for an approach that wants to mend ties instead of burning bridges. So in that regard, I think that new thinking is shared by Erdogan, and also there's a new regional mood. That's at least my take.
I agree with your take, but I understood something, that in fact, that countries of the region would do well in talking to Erdogan now because he's in a weak position.
They are talking to him because he's in a weak position.
No, is this what you said? That they do well in talking to him now because he is in a weak position?
No, because he changed his policy. He's not pursuing it. His regional policy is not as aggressive as it used to be.
Yes.
So indirectly, yes, and he's doing that because he's in a weaker position.
In a weak position. So in fact, they can get the best out of any talks with him now.
And it's in the interest of everyone, if you think about it. I mean, everyone wants investments, right? I was talking to a UAE diplomat, and he said, you know, the orders that we receive from back home changed. They now want us to focus on attracting investment. So that's our number one goal now. So a rapprochement with Turkey, for instance, could serve that purpose too. So I think right now in the region, economic concerns, particularly after COVID, they are the top concern in the region, and that requires mending ties. So that's why I think it's in the interest of everyone to mend ties, but it doesn't mean that this trust is always going to be there because of what Erdogan did after the uprising started.
Thank you very much. فالآن أنا سأتوجه إليك. يعني جونيل قالت أن واضح أن الولايات المتحدة تنسحب أو على الأقل يعني تخفض من وجودها في المنطقة، وأن هناك حاجة أدرك اللاعبون المختلفون في المنطقة أن هناك حاجة لأن يتحدثوا مع بعضهم البعض ليتفقوا على بعض التدابير الأمنية في المنطقة، ثم أن الكل لديه اهتمامات اقتصادية، ويريدون الجميع يريدون جذب الاستثمارات إلى بلدانهم إلى آخره. أنا سألت جونيل إذا كان ما قالته يعني أن أردوغان في وضع هش، وبالتالي البلدان المنطقة تستطيع أن تحصل منه على أفضل النتائج في أي محادثات معه. ما رأيك في هذا الكلام؟
يعني أولاً الجزء الخاص بأن الانسحاب الأمريكي من منطقة الشرق الأوسط والاستدارة نحو آسيا ربما يخلق مساحة أرحب للتفاهمات ما بين القوى الإقليمية. أنا أتفق مع هذا الطرح، والدليل على ذلك بداية المباحثات ما بين إيران والمملكة العربية السعودية، وهذا جديد. وأيضا طلب الخارجية الإيرانية أمس بتوطيد العلاقات مع مصر، وأيضا قبلها محاولات تركيا وهي قارئة للخريطة بشكل جيد في عهد أردوغان بالتقرب إلى الدول العربية. ولكن فكرة يعني أن لكل دولة إقليمية وضعها وسياستها وتحدياتها الداخلية ومشروعاتها في المنطقة، هذا يحجم التعامل. بمعنى مصر على سبيل المثال لم تتدخل في بشكل يعني أزعج أحد في عقدية أو عفوا عشرية الربيع العربي، وبالتالي يعني سياستها الخارجية مع الدول متوازنة جدا موثوقة. هذا جعلها تلعب دور كبير في إعادة ترتيب أوراق المنطقة بشكل كامل وتأسيسها لتحالفات مع بغداد والأردن المشرق الجديد. أيضا لعب دور أفضل في ليبيا من أجل الدفع نحو الانتخابات. الجانب الإيراني ربما بسبب الضغوط الاقتصادية في المنطقة والتلويح دائما بمحاولات يعني حصارها أو إخراجها من سوريا لصالح المنافس أو الحليف الروسي، هذا دفعها للتقرب من المملكة العربية السعودية والتباحث حول وضع حرب اليمن، وأيضا التفاهم في المنطقة بشكل عام، وعزز ذلك نتائج الانتخابات الداخلية العراقية. تحدثت عن النموذج المصري والنموذج الإيراني، حتى أوضح النموذج التركي أنه هو مختلف بشكل كبير. سياساته في المنطقة يعني انحرفت بشكل غير معقول، وبالتالي فكرة أن يعود النظام التركي لسياساته السابقة وأن يجد مساحة من التفاهمات أعتقد أنها محفوفة بالمخاطر. لماذا؟ لأنه على سبيل المثال عودة علاقاته مع مصر تستدعي منه أنه ينسحب عسكريا، وهذا شرط مصر الأساسي والرئيسي على مائدة المباحثات الاستكشافية، من أن ينسحب عسكريا من ليبيا. أردوغان أو استراتيجية وسياسة أردوغان لا يمكن أن نتوقع أنه ينسحب دون مقابل. ما المقابل الذي يمكن أن يحصل عليه في ليبيا الآن؟ لا يوجد مقابل يعني يستطيع أحد أن يقدمه له. بالنسبة لسوريا كان هناك حديث بأن علي مملوك وهو وزير الأمن السوري أو أهم رجل أمني في سوريا كان هيجري مباحثات مع فيدان هو رئيس المخابرات التركية، ونشرت وسائل إعلام كبيرة وتحدث كبار الإعلاميين السوريين ولهم علاقة مع النظام السوري، ولكن اللقاء تأجل بعد أن تم الاتفاق عليه بعد قمة بغداد، وهذا يؤدي أو يؤكد أن تركيا حتى الآن ترفض فكرة الانسحاب من شرق سوريا بشكل يعني لا يقبل النقاش، وتضع دائما ملف الأكراد على الطاولة حتى لو كان هناك أسباب أخرى بالنسبة لتركيا. أمريكا أعلنت أنها لن تتوقف عن دعم الأكراد في الشمال السوري، وبالتالي الأسباب قائمة ولا يمكن أن يكون هناك عودة للعلاقات ما بين سوريا وتركيا طالما التحدي قائم. بالإضافة أيضا إلى أن تركيا تختلف عن اللاعبين الإقليميين يعني في المنطقة، هي تنافس يعني القوى الإقليمية كمصر وكإيران وغيرها في المنطقة، وأيضا تتصادم مع نفوذ الدولة الفرنسية. هذا له انعكاسات في المنطقة، يعني ما حدث في ليبيا يؤكد أن الصراع حتى أكبر من القوى الإقليمية، ما حدث حتى في إفريقيا وتصريحات الرئيس أردوغان أثناء زيارته الإفريقية أمس وأول أمس عن النفوذ الفرنسي وغيره يؤكد أن التصادمات مع النظام التركي قادمة بعكس ما البعض يتوقعه. وبالتالي أنا أجد أن القوة التركية أو النظام التركي الأردوغاني ما بين قوسين، لأن هي سياسة أردوغان شخصيا حتى مش حزب العدالة والتنمية، في المرحلة القادمة سيكون هناك تصادمات كثيرة نظرا لأن الحلفاء الأوروبيين منقسمين على ذاتهم في التعامل مع الملف التركي. فكرة الانسحاب الأمريكي ربما تثير شهية أردوغان للعب دور أبرز كبديل عن القوة أو الحماية الأمريكية في المنطقة، وبالتالي لا أتوقع أن أردوغان أو ضعف أردوغان في المرحلة الحالية سيدفعه إلى تقديم تنازلات، خاصة أن الملف الأهم على طاولة صانع القرار التركي هو الحصول على كعكة من الغاز في شرق المتوسط، وحتى الآن لم يتم إحراز أي تقدم في المباحثات ما بين تركيا واليونان، ومطالب تركيا في البحر المتوسط تتنافى مع القانون الدولي واتفاقية أعالي البحار، وبالتالي لا أجد أي يعني أسباب يمكن أن تؤدي لإعادة صياغة الدور التركي في المنطقة بما يتناسب مع القوى الإقليمية الأخرى أو القوى العربية.
شكرا جزيلا. Dean Fahmy, you have listened to several interventions, but by our two panels, they have covered a vast field, and from Turkish domestic politics to regional politics to relations with the global powers, in particular the United States. We have not mentioned Russia at all in this discussion. So what is your reaction? Is Erdogan in decline? And if he's in decline, what could be his reaction in the region? Because a person in decline at times is dangerous.
Well, I'll answer that, but before I do, let me just pose a couple of questions, because frankly, it'll be part of the answer to your question. Erdogan came to Cairo 2012, 2013, and I attended a dinner for him. I was not a government official, but I attended a dinner for him at the time, and he was asked at the dinner, how do you manage your politics in Turkey, that is a secular country, given that you are an Islamist party? And he immediately cut the question and said, no, you're wrong. My party is not Islamist, but I am. So in a way, it confirms what you just said, Dr. Tul. But my question consequently is, you've both agreed that he's an opportunist, that he will shift from one policy to the other depending on political balance, even if you may have different interpretations of how far he will go. But my real question is, because the focus has been very much on Erdogan, not enough on Turkey, per se. First of all, let's assume he is elected and the dice rolls in his favor. Will he go back to Islamist politics? Is he really an Islamist, or is he a politician who used political Islam to pursue his goals? The second question, and this, frankly, Madame Dawi Aidan, the second question is the force and vigor of Turkish engagement in the Middle East over the last 10, 15 years has really been astonishing. But what has really been surprising is that the argumentation behind it has been historic rights from World War I and World War II and so on and so forth. Is this Erdogan, or is this the consensus in the body politique in Turkey? I know the nationalists may adopt this policy. أنا واتفق معاكي تماما فيما أشير عن حدود المائية والمياه الزرقاء أو هكذا. But my real question is, Erdogan is the issue today, but Turkey will be the issue, I don't mean in a negative sense, for a much longer time. Where will Turkey be if Erdogan is not elected? ولو أقدر أطرح لمدام هل تقديرك إن هناك مجال لتوافق عربي تركي في ضوء التنافس الشديد، وأنا هنا بتكلم العربي التركي مش العربي الأردوغاني، في ضوء التنافس الشديد والتواجد الشديد لتركيا في سوريا، في العراق، في ليبيا، هل يستطيع رئيس تركي جديد أن ينسحب من كل هذه المناطق؟ كان سؤالك إيه؟
Regime in decline.
And to answer just Dr. Ibrahim, I think anybody who has been in power for a long time ultimately reaches his peak somewhere between the first and second third of his period. I don't think that the political environment in the Middle East or in the world generally would be supportive of the kind of regime and ambitions that Erdogan represents. But to be very honest with you, because we've had two very good speakers, the decline of the regime per se would be a function of domestic politics in Turkey much more than foreign policy, although what happens abroad does affect it. And I'm not a good reader of the domestic scene in Turkey, so I'd leave that question really to either of the two of you. Shukran.
I think we have addressed it. So, a regime or Erdogan in decline and his regional approaches, how his regional approaches are impacted by his decline. So, I'll just add to the question that Dean Fahmy has raised.
Well, I'll start with the question about will he go back to being an Islamist? I think that's an important question, and my answer is no. Because the backbone of his Islamist agenda back in 2011 was to raise a pious generation, and that failed. He's very unpopular among Turkey's youth, which is a very important constituency. 7 million young people who did not vote in the last elections will vote in the next elections. What is more striking is that there's been a rise among the conservative kids whose parents still support Erdogan. Pious, religious kids, those kids who go to Imam Hatip schools, for instance. Deism is on the rise. And there was a report by Turkish Ministry of Education, a research conducted among conservative youth. So they found that young people are giving up on Islam because they associate that with corruption. They associate that, they blame that for the country's ills. They strongly support secularism. So I think that's number one. And second, why he won't go back to being an Islamist. And second, he has to secure some kind of normalcy in the country. Why? Because Turkey is a huge country. And Erdogan is having trouble governing it. So that's why I think he regrets that he switched to the presidential system. And in fact, that's why he's been looking for a way out. He's been talking about a redesigned, maybe strengthened opposition often talks about a renewed parliamentary system, and Erdogan wants to do certain things to fix the problems of the presidential system, because that presidential system that he aimed would give him more power, in fact, has rendered him even more powerless. So in that system, you cannot come to power alone. You need alliances, you need constituencies, and that Islamist constituency is not there. It's not strong enough. It never has been in Turkey. There is an Islamist party, a real Islamist party in Turkey, that captures 1%, 2% of the national vote. So that tells you something. And also, Turkey doesn't have oil. The reason why he has to restore some kind of normalcy is Turkey doesn't have oil. That means Turkey needs trade, Turkey needs investment. And that's why he's been toning down his anti-Western rhetoric, because EU is Turkey's #1 trading partner. So when he was in New York, for instance, he talked to investors. He spends a lot of time on that, on the business side of it, because unlike previously, before, Turkish business associations wouldn't dare to criticize him openly, never. Just heard last week, the biggest Turkish business association, the head of it was very critical of Erdogan's chaotic fiscal policy. So that tells you that he's struggling, and going back to a heavy ideological or an Islamist agenda would make him even weaker.
Thank you very much. أستاذة هند، أنا أعرف أن عندك التزام.
ولولا أن الالتزام لو تأخرت عن
فلا تفضلي يعني خدي وقتك سريعا وتفضلي.
لا اسمح لي أرد على دكتور نبيل لو في وقت بس لسؤاله، إن هل ممكن مسار العلاقات المصرية العربية التركية يتغير بتغير الرئيس التركي؟ هذا سيتوقف على هوية الرئيس التركي. حاليا الصراع في حزب العدالة والتنمية في الداخل كما ذكرت في البداية، وما أدى لاستقالة شيوخ الحزب كأحمد داوود أوغلو وعلي باباجان وغيرهم من الشخصيات، له علاقة بمن سيخلف أردوغان. نعلم أن صهر أردوغان لديه تيار قوي مؤثر داخل الحزب وفي كافة مؤسسات الدولة التركية. هذا يتم استغلال هذا التيار أو استخدامه من أجل يعني التمهيد الطريق لصهر أردوغان اللي هو براءات البرق لتولي منصب الرئاسة أو خوض الانتخابات الرئاسية كبديل للحزب عن الرئيس أردوغان، نظرا لبعض التقارير التي تتحدث عن تدهور حالته الصحية أو أنه اكتفى بهذا القدر من المشوار السياسي. إذا كان يعني الرئيس القادم لتركيا من نفس الحزب، لا أتوقع أن يكون هناك تغير جذري في السياسات التركية، خاصة أن هذه السياسات من صنيعة كما ذكرت مجموعة البجع وليس من أردوغان شخصيا اللي بيترأسها صهر أردوغان. أما إذا كان الرئيس القادم من الأحزاب الأخرى التي صعدت في الانتخابات السابقة أو حتى رفاق أردوغان في مشواره وبعد ذلك انقلبوا عليه، أعتقد سيكون هناك تغير ويمكن الانسحاب، رغم أن البرلمان التركي أمس كان يجدد اتفاقية أو يعني قرار السماح للقوات العسكرية التركية بالقيام بعمليات في سوريا والعراق لمدة عامين قادمين. معنى ذلك أن تركيا ماضية في سياستها تجاه المنطقة، وهذا أيضا سنراه في الأيام القادمة مع الانتخابات الرئاسية. وأكرر شكركم على الاستضافة وشكرا للحضور، وأنا أسفة جدا بس ميعاد المناظرة كان قبل ميعاد الجلسة، أنا أسفة.
شكرا جزيلا على زيارتك وعلى تشريفك لحوار التحرير. شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا. We still have 7 minutes to go, so now the floor is yours.
Sorry, Dr. Ibrahim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I forgot to answer one of the questions of...
I'm giving the floor to you anyway.
Okay, thank you. So Ambassador Fahmy had a question, and I think a great question. He asked, but we only talk about Erdogan, we don't talk about Turkey, and that's a great question because the 2019 local elections show that Turkey is bigger than Erdogan. That's what I keep telling my American friends in Washington. My line is, go beyond that, engage the opposition. There is now, I mean, up until 2019, to tell you the truth, I had given up on Turkish democracy. And we even stopped talking about elections. We didn't think that they mattered anymore in Erdogan's new Turkey, but 2019 elections proved us wrong. So it is, I think we should all start talking about the other Turkey, because they're coming, it's united, it's more united than ever. And it's thanks to the presidential system, by the way. Turkey, Erdogan had been blessed with a divided opposition. And that was one of the factors that he kept winning elections after elections. But now, after switching to the presidential system, no party can secure the majority without an alliance with others. So that's, and also opposition to the presidential system became a common ground among an otherwise very divided opposition. So they used opposition to the presidential system as a common ground to build an alliance. That alliance is fragile because we're talking about ideologically completely different parties, but I think it's strong enough, it was strong enough to deal a huge electoral blow to Erdogan in 2019. But what does that mean? I mean, what does post-Erdogan Turkey means? Well, I think the bad news is nationalism cuts across party lines. It's a very strong current. You have nationalists, even Turkish Islamists are nationalists, ethnic nationalists. You have nationalists in every party, and it's a very strong current in Turkish politics, which means that you will keep seeing some of the aggressive policies that Erdogan has pursued, for instance, in Eastern Mediterranean. But having said that, I think if Erdogan is not in the picture, you'll see a much less aggressive and less interventionist regional policy from Turkey. And that's good news for everyone. But some level of anti-Westernism is going to be there because, again, that cuts across party lines. But another point is that after Erdogan, there will be so much to undo once he's gone. Institutions are hollowed out. Even Turkish MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it has become almost a non-actor. Turkey used to have this great foreign policy tradition, a great institutional capacity. The MFA used to be a great institution, not anymore. You can't really find seasoned, experienced diplomats anymore. The posts have been filled by Erdogan loyalists, like every other institution. So he has done so much damage that a Turkey under opposition rule is going to be very busy with undoing all those damages. That means it will be an inward-looking country that will not be able to afford an adventurous foreign policy.
Thank you very much. We'll consider these your final words. And now let me ask Dean Fahmy if he would like to make final comments before we call it an evening.
First of all, I really want to thank you for coming here, and also Madame Dawi for her participation. I frankly found this discussion extremely insightful, informative, and useful. Turkey is going to be an important player in the region for many, many years to come. And frankly, I expect a number of other regional players, including Arab regional players, including Egypt, to play an important role. So having a better understanding of how our internal systems work is, I think, extremely important as we look forward. I'm very happy that we have a physical presence here, and I hope that the participation on the Zoom was also available in a good number. This program will be webcast again and made available to anybody, and it will be on our website for those who want to go back to it. But I hope we will have many more events like this, and we actually have scheduled events coming up about other main players in the Middle East, very close to Turkey. One of them is Syria. So we'll sort of take the Turkish-Syrian angle and move on from that. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Gönül, for your brilliant interventions. I think we all benefited a great deal from what you have said. I think that the interest that we have and the objective is that we need to ensure peaceful, constructive policies and constructive approaches in this region. Turkey is an essential, fundamental actor in the region. Egypt is another fundamental actor in the region. These are populous countries with historical traditions. History binds countries of this region. History also has separated them at the same time. All relations between countries have their positive and their less positive aspects. But again, the objective is to build a peaceful region that allows for development and that allows for better standards of living, better livelihoods for the populations, for the peoples of the region. Thank you very much for your visit, for participating in Tahrir Dialogue, and I wish to thank the audience, those who are present in person, and the audience through Zoom. Thank you very much to all. Good evening.